And the aim of the Institute really is to try to make peace a more tangible measure of progress. So we want to add more grit and professionalization, as Patrick has pointed out before, to the field of peace and peace building, and start to try to understand, well, how can we measure it, and how can those measures actually make us think more strategically and proactively about investing in violence reduction and in peace building.
What is really valuable about the GPI is that it has helped us quantify the value of peace building, both in terms of why we want to invest in it and the cost of conflict.
So we look at these definitions of negative and positive peace at the Institute for Economics and Peace. These are theories developed by Johan Galtung, and we're kind of applying our own definitions to them. And we start with negative peace. And we look at negative peace as the absence of violence or the absence of the fear of violence. And the reason that we start there is that we need to use a definition that's measurable. We need to look beyond just peace as the absence of war or conflict. So this is something that also includes interpersonal relationships. And we also want to make this more universal. What is the impact of violence at home, not just when we're thinking about conflicts abroad? And then we also look at positive peace. So it's not just enough to have a lack of violence, you also have to have those sustaining structures and attitudes to make sure that you're not living in a vulnerable situation that can lead to spirals into violence. But we're trying to understand here which countries have stronger levels of positive peace, which countries have weaker levels. Where are those vulnerabilities and levels of resilience?
Where we really need to, with this work, is really understanding how negative peace and positive peace work together. The other place where Mercy Corps has really focused this kind of how to do positive peace work earlier in a crisis, this resilience work in a crisis, is how do you prevent spillover from a crisis in one area to a neighboring country? And so, for example, with the displacement out of Syria, there's been huge refugee flows, particularly to Lebanon, Turkey, and Jordan. And I actually think Lebanon is a success story. But what we've been doing there is working with municipalities to help absorb the refugees so that the pressure on those services that are due to the influx of refugees doesn't create tensions either between Lebanese and the Syrian refugees or between Lebanese and the government. So again, going back to the positive peace, how do you do service provision? How do you build infrastructure or institutions so that they can absorb these, what is a shock to the system, this huge influx of refugees?
So what have we found in this 10th edition of the Global Peace Index? And overall, we've found that levels of global peacefulness continue to decline, and this is a slight decline, while the gap between the most and least peaceful countries continue to widen. So we're seeing an increasing inequality in the levels of peacefulness, and that's really important.
I am going to try to ground truth this a bit in how we see these factors playing out at a more local level. And what I would first start with is what Michelle said about this inequality of peace also very much mirrors what we see around fragility in the world today.
But in this one-year period, what are some of the major highlights? Well, the average level of country peacefulness has declined, and it's the largest decline that we've seen in the last 6 years. So while 79 countries deteriorated, 81 countries became more peaceful. But what's important to note here is that those 79 countries, they had larger falls. So that's what's impacting the index more. That's what's decreasing peace, and that's primarily coming from the Middle East and North Africa. Yemen, Bahrain, Libya, all fell in the index significantly, and this has had a major impact on the scores.
And what I also want to say, what the data just so clearly shows to me is the amount that Syria is having an impact on the levels of violence today. And I still work quite a bit with Mercy Corps on the Syria conflict. I particularly spent a lot of time on Syria about a year ago. And as a psychologist, my expert analysis was people are just mean. I will say I've worked on many conflicts in the world, around the world. That has been the most depressing conflict by far that I've ever worked on. I was in South Sudan the year before, I said that about South Sudan, and it just didn't compare. So I will just say, urge people to really understand what's going on in the Syria conflict, because it really is, I believe, it's changing the way we do development and peace building work in the future.